Hello and welcome back, guys. We're now starting a new story, A Trainer and His Pokemon, written by Mightiest Battle. You can find author's profile link in the description. Let's begin. A trainer and his Pokemon. Pokemon can talk and are anthropomorphic. This will be a human X Pokegirl HRM story. Prologue, where it starts. Third POV, an 8-year-old Naruto sighed as he watched his younger siblings as they were given their first Pokemon by Tsunade and Jiraiya. Tsunade gave Naruto a Sliggoo and Menma got a Frokale. Naruto, age 2, was 2 years older than them. But, because his parents didn't think he had the skills to have his own yet, they told him to wait a little longer. Naruto waited 2 years but was done waiting. He was done with not being seen or heard for the last 2 years. Stepping away, not wanting to see the smiles on all their faces. Naruto walked to the front door and grabbed the backpack he'd readied. He had taken his father's unused MSTR ball and 5 normal Pokemon ball. If they weren't going to help him become a trainer, he'd go out and become one. Naruto had a week's worth of food, all the money he'd saved or was given by his GG Horizon, and what he earned for running small errands for people. He had 700 Pokédollars from his 2 years of work and hoped to win a few battle tournaments after getting a Pokemon. That could make them more money and someday build them a home. He opened the door and walked out, then slammed the door. Naruto started to cry before he ran away from the house. Naruto ran to the forest surrounding the forest like he had so many times before. He didn't know how many times he'd run here after his siblings and other kids made fun of him for not having his own Pokemon. The clouds above him were dark, and Naruto didn't notice the storm rolling in. I'm not staying where I'm not wanted. Naruto rushed into the forest. As the rain started to rally, Naruto was rushing through the trees. Naruto ignored the rain as he ran but hoped to find a wild Pokemon weakened by a fight with another Pokemon. 2 hours later, Naruto finally had to stop his moving due to the rain and looked around for somewhere to stay for the night. After a few minutes, he spotted a small cave on the side of a cliff. Quickly rushing over, Naruto walked in and stopped. Laying there shivering on the floor was a strange-looking Ralts. This Ralts had red hair with black horns and was dressed in rags. Naruto walked over and saw that the Ralts was hurt and had blood coming from the underside of the hair. Naruto forgot his plan for the moment. He rushed up to the Ralts, picked the Pokemon up, and looked it over. It looked like it got a hell of a beating from something or someone. What happened here? Naruto didn't know what to do but knew they both needed to warm back up. Naruto laid the Ralts back down and quickly got his backpack off. He quickly ripped it open and pulled out a new set of clothes, a blanket, and bandages. After seeing the wound, Naruto got changed, picked the Ralts back up, and wrapped them around her head. Once the wound was treated to the best of his knowledge, he held the Ralts to his chest to share heat. Naruto felt the body as he picked the Ralts up and guessed this was a female. Naruto wrapped the blanket around them both, leaned back into the cave wall, and closed his eyes to get some sleep. Several hours later, the Ralts groaned as she opened her eyes and reached where MSTR hit her before throwing her into the forest. But she stopped when she felt something wrapped around her head. Then she realized she wasn't cold anymore. The Ralts looked around and saw she was in a set of small arms with a blanket around them. What? Ralts looked up and saw a human boy with whisker marks, scars, and blonde hair. He had a soft-looking face and looked like he wouldn't hurt a Pokemon if his life depended on it. Ralts also didn't feel any dark thoughts coming from him like her MSTR gave off. She reached up and touched his face and felt how warm it was. So warm. Ralts pulled her hand back as Naruto was starting to wake up from her touch. Naruto opened his eyes and looked down at Ralts' red eyes. He smiled at her, and Ralt blushed when she saw his soft smile. Hey, I'm glad to see you're awake. Are you hungry or thirsty? Ralts blushed as she heard his voice. She'd only ever been yelled at or cursed at by her MSTR, and she couldn't believe he was holding her so gently. Ralts nodded as she moved around a little. See, can I have some water? Naruto nodded, opened the blanket, and saw it was still raining. It looked like night had come as well. Naruto laughed and nodded, then reached over and grabbed the backpack. Naruto opened the bag and pulled out a large water bottle. Naruto quickly opened it and held the bottle to her lips. Ralts quickly started to drink, not realizing how thirsty she was. After a few seconds, she drank a third of the bottle. Ralts let go of the bottle, and Naruto smiled as he capped the bottle and then wrapped the blanket back around them. "If you want to come with me, we'll move out at first light." Ralts looked up at Naruto for a moment before tears filled her eyes. Ralts couldn't believe what she was hearing. She'd only known one human who was cruel and brutal in all forms. She grabbed Naruto's arm and nodded, wiping the tears from her eyes with her other arm. "Yes. I don't want to go back to my old MSTR." Naruto smiled and nodded as he ran his hand over the Ralts' hair. He shushed her as she cried into his chest, then smiled before he spoke up again. "So, what's your name? I don't think you always want me calling you Ralts." The Ralts looked up at Naruto as she wiped her eyes with her arm. She sniffed as she looked at Naruto. I don't have one." Naruto frowned as he looked at her. "We can't have you going around without one. So I'll give you one if you don't care." She nodded, and Naruto smiled before he gave her another look. "Your hair is a pretty shade of red, so how does Rosa sound?" The now-named Rosa smiled as she looked up at her new MSTR before snuggling back into Naruto's chest. These two, without knowing that this meeting would in time, shack the world of Pokemon and humans to the core. 2 weeks later Naruto walked with Rosa on his back with his backpack on his chest. But he couldn't help but notice the small bounds pressing into his back. Rosa smiled as she rode on her MSTR's back. Naruto had been carrying her the last few hours after she almost fell from a small cliff. Naruto smiled when he was on the edge of the forest. The edge. Rosa smiled as she looked over Naruto's shoulder as they came out onto a grassy field with a small river beach along a large river. Rosa smiled as she looked at the large river, never having seen one before. Naruto, on the other hand, saw a few oran berry bushes. Smiling and happy for the chance to start restocking their food supplies. Naruto sat Rosa down on her feet, and Rosa smiled as she walked over to the river. Naruto quickly walked over and started to gather the berries but stopped when he saw a strange green tail. Naruto pushed the bushes aside and saw a cat-like girl covered in green fur and had cat ears on her head. She had a leaf-like fur patterned on her face with a ring of darker green fur around her neck and around the edge of her ears. The hair on her head was a pale green, almost white. Naruto sat the bag down and stepped into the bushes, and Rosa saw this. She rushed over and watched as Naruto pulled a young Sprigatito out from the bushes. They saw she was skinny but still had some meat on her bones. "What do we do?" Naruto looked down at Rosa as he held the Sprigatito in his arms. "We need to find our way to a town. We need more money and better clothes, and we all need to get medical checks. But, first we need the rest of the berries so we still have enough food." Rosa nodded, grabbed his backpack, and started throwing as many berries as possible into the bag. She had a little trouble zipping it up but managed it and helped Naruto get it on while he held the Sprigatito. Soon, they were moving down the coast. Naruto knew there was a town along the coast. The Sprigatito stayed asleep for the next hour as Naruto and Rosa approached a small town. Naruto smiled when he saw the Pokemon Center. As he rushed them to the center, neither Rosa nor Naruto noticed the now-retired Professor Oak, who saw them running. Professor Oak came here hoping to get some studying in the far-off elemental region. Not known to many, this region had a second name. The All region, since Pokemon from almost all over the world, could be found here. But, what caught Oak's attention was the state they were in. The boy looked so tired and dirty, with tears in his clothes. The Ralts had red hair with an off-white color to her skin, not the pure white a normal Ralts had. She wore a shirt that looked like it may have been from the boy. The shirt she wore looked beat up, and she used it as a dress. And then there was the Sprigatito. She looked like she hadn't eaten a solid meal in a long time. All of them were in a sorry state, and Professor Oak, a father and grandfather, couldn't walk away. Something is wrong here. Professor Oak quickly walked over to the Pokemon Center. He walked in and saw Nurse Joy and her Pokemon rushing the two Pokemon into the back, with another nurse checking Naruto over quickly. In Konoha City, President Hiruzen stood in front of the home of Minato, one of the Elite Four of the Elemental region, and his wife Kushina, one of the greatest water Pokemon experts in the region. Beside him was his Infernape, his oldest partner, dressed in a simple pair of shorts and an open button-up shirt. Hiruzen and many others were worried about why Naruto hadn't been seen around the village. Unlike many older and young trainers, Naruto was well liked by many. Hiruzen wanted to question Minato and Kushina about why their oldest was denied a Pokemon partner. At the same time, the two younger kids were given one. As he was about to knock on the door, he heard a voice. "Hey, Professor." Hiruzen looked back and saw the very man he was coming to talk to. Hiruzen's Infernape snorted out some flames, a sign Minato knew meant the fire-type ape was annoyed. Minato also saw the annoyed look on Hiruzen's face and didn't know why they seemed upset. "Minato." The Infernape growled out his name, the older male voice showing his annoying tone. Hiruzen stepped forward and narrowed his eyes as he looked at the man he helped get into the Elite Four. "Minato, where is Naruto? And why has nobody seen him for almost a month?" Minato looked at Hiruzen like crazy. "Naruto? What are you talking about? He's been around." Hiruzen and his Infernape both narrowed their eyes. "Why are you lying, Minato? None of us haven't seen him since you and your wife gave your two younger children their starter Pokemon before him. Something I still say is wrong since Naruto had so much talent with many clans Pokemon and the wild Pokemo. All types would come to the edge of the forest to play with him." Minato, not knowing that, spoke again. "What are you saying? Naruto never told us about this." Minato was starting to question Hiruzen's mind. There was no way Naruto had that kind of talent or maturity to deal with both tamed and wild Pokemon in such a way. Hiruzen and Infernape both scoffed. The Infernape spoke up this time. "Are you this stupid? My own youngling will chase him down to play with him or to drag him off to the other 8 Pokemon of my MSTR clan. Same with Mikoto's Pokemon and many of the Uchiha's dog and bird Pokemon. Then there are the wild Pokemo that come around looking for him. Plus, many other Pokemon from around the city who have been asking about him." Minato is now starting to believe them, thinking of what Naruto had been doing for the last few weeks, but then froze. He couldn't remember seeing Naruto for a while now. Not at meals or when the family went to the local hot springs. Not when Naruto and Menma started to train their Pokemon. That made a day of that last week. As Minato was about to speak, Hiruzen's phone started to ring. Hiruzen, annoyed, pulled his phone out and saw it was Professor Oak calling. What does Professor Oak need now of all times? Hiruzen answered the call and put it on speaker out of habit. "Sorry Oak, but I'm in the middle of something, so I'll call you back later." Hiruzen, wait. You won't believe it, I found a hybrid Ralts. She's one of the rarest mixed breeds. A human Pokemon hybrid in the next city over with a young boy named Naruto. He also had a shiny Sprigatito who'd had her fur dyed to look normal. She has pure white fur with a cherry red leaf on her face. Hiruzen and Minato's eyes opened wide upon hearing that. You need to come to my vacation home and see these 3. This boy looked like that Minato guy of this Elite Four but with whisker marks on his face. He told me he was neglected by his family and left after his family didn't pay him any kind of attention for 2 years. They denied him a Pokemon, saying he wasn't ready, but all the Pokemon that came near him loved him like he was one of them. I know you can help me find his family. When we find them, I'll ask for their trainer licenses to be blacklisted from all the gyms and this region league. I've already got some of the police looking into this as well as calls to the licensing schools all around this city to make sure they know to look for any families that seem to be missing a child. Mianto's eyes widened as if this did not get out any farther. His life and his family's lives would be over. As Minato was about to tell the professor on the other side of the phone to wait, Infernape grabbed his mouth as Hiruzen looked at him with a powerful glare. Knowing what was going to happen if Minato got to Naruto before him. Minato went for his Pokemon Ball, but the Infernape grabbed his arm and slammed him to the side of his house as Hiruzen spoke. "I'll be there in a few hours. Make sure that boy doesn't go anywhere. And as the former champion, I'll help see to the blacklisting." "I can do that, and thanks, my friend." Hiruzen hung up the phone and turned his back on Minato. "Let's move Infernape." Infernape dropped Minato, and the two rushed off. Getting his breath back and in a panic, Minato threw out 2 Pokemon Ball. His Luxray came out first, his black jeans and shirt blending into this fur, and the second was his Electivire, his yellow and black jeans and open jacket. "You two find Kushina and my kids while I try to stop Hiruzen." "Right." Minato took off running after his former idol, not knowing the news crew he'd come home to meet had heard and recorded everything they said in the phone call. But Minato never knew he wouldn't see Naruto for a long time. 3 hours later Naruto smiled as he watched Rosa eat her second plate of rice and curry. He then looked at Springatito's room. She was still in the room Professor Oak had her sleeping in. She was still weak but improving. She was just at the beginning of the middle stage of malnutrition, which Nurse Joy had said was called wasted. If she had gotten any worse, it could have stunted her growth or affected her health even worse. But Naruto found her just in time so she could fully recover in a few months. That means eating right, letting her body rest, and getting her body back into shape. MSTR. Naruto looked back at Rosa, and she was pushing her plate to the middle of the table. Naruto saw the new clothes Professor Oak had brought out for her. She had on a red shirt that fit right and a pair of black shorts. Naruto got out of his seat, and Rosa took his hand when he held it out to her. She smiled, and Naruto smiled at her, the light in her ruby-red eyes. She pulled him along and he followed her over the room Professor Oak was letting them us. Naruto heard the front door open before he froze at the voice. "Where is he, Oak?" Naruto looked back as his Gigi came around the corner. Naruto smiled as he looked at him. "Gigi." Hiruzen smiled as he rushed forward and dropped to his knees as he hugged Naruto. He held it to Naruto before a small hand punched him in the eye. Yelling from surprise and pain, he let go of Naruto and fell back. He held his eye and looked at the hybrid Ralts. He saw the rage in her eyes as she got between Naruto and him. "Don't you touch my MSTR." Hiruzen moved his hand as he got up. "Sweetheart, I promise I mean Naruto no harm." Rosa glared at him as she looked at this human who dared to touch her MSTR. "I don't care. My MSTR doesn't need you touching him." Naruto laughed before he wrapped an arm around her stomach, something he'd learned she liked. Rosa relaxed as she leaned back into Naruto. Hiruzen, looking at this, wasn't even surprised, as Naruto did have a calming effect on both people and Pokemon. He just had a way of relaxing either with just a touch. "Gigi." Hiruzen looked at Naruto and saw him smiling, but he also noticed that the pain in his eyes had faded a bit. "I'll get her set in the room and I'll come back and talk with you and Professor Oak." Hiruzen nodded as he got to his feet. Naruto opened the door and turned, pulling Rosa along. She shot Hiruzen a look before she walked into the room. Hiruzen followed Professor Oak to his living room and saw books covering the large coffee table. They quickly sat down, and Professor Oak explained everything he could before they heard the door open. As Naruto rounded the corner, he saw his Gigi's face was full of rage. But the rage vanished when he saw Naruto, and he smiled as he looked at him. But the smile faded as he walked closer. "Before you say anything, Gigi. I'm not going back until I'm ready to." Hiruzen sighed and should have guessed this was how this would start. Hiruzen sat up and started to talk. "Naruto, Oak has explained the gist of what you told him. But, you can't say here either, so I have an offer for you, Naruto. In Kanto, Professor Oak region, you can be with some of my family living there for a while and start your journey. There are also a lot of competitive Pokemon tournaments, so add that to the money I'll send you can make your way. Naruto listened and then spoke up, seeing a hole. What about my former family? I don't think they'd be happy the unwanted child is getting ahead of their favorites. Hiruzen frowned upon hearing that, and he should have guessed that a smart kid like Naruto would see that. I think you may want to see this. Hiruzen grabbed the touch phone from his pocket and opened it to a video. Naruto took the phone and hit the play button on the screen. Naruto was surprised that his Gigi had just confronted his former father like he did. Once Naruto watched the video to the end, he handed the phone back and then sat down. Hiruzen put the phone away as he looked at Naruto. Naruto, my boy, I will send 3,000 Poké-dollars a month since it won't put a dent in the sales of my all figures and live appearances. I also have a ton of investments so I won't feel the hit, but before we get going too much. Hiruzen pulled out a Pokeball. He opened it, and a second later, Naruto was tackled back. He fell hard to the ground and looked up to see the daughter of his Gigi's Infernape. She was a little Chimchar with the front of her hair in a swirl with the top flowing back to the back of her head. She was in her favorite pair of black shorts and a white shirt with a sun on the front. Her little flaming tail was burning brighter as she looked at him. Naruto. She wrapped her arms around his neck and cried louder. Naruto patted her back, knowing he wasn't getting away until she let it out. Naruto sat up and wrapped one arm under her, grabbed the couch, and pulled them up. Chimchar sniffed as she sat on Naruto's arm. Naruto sat down on the other couch and the Chimchar sat in his lap, not wanting to let go of him. Naruto rubbed her back, knowing he wouldn't be free. It's good to see you, Cici. Cici laughed as she rubbed her head on his neck. Get off him. Naruto jumped at Rosa's voice before a body slammed into their side. Naruto fell off the couch, and he felt Cici be ripped off him. Oak and Hiruzen were shocked to see the Ralts teleport, slam into the two, and then rip Cici off him. Hiruzen jumped up, seeing what was the strongest Chimchar of this generation just being thrown away like that. Rosa grabbed Naruto and pulled him back as she glared at that Chimchar and got up. He's my MSTR. Don't touch him again. Chimchar growled, and her flaming tail grew a little. She glared as she looked at Rosa. That my Naruto. Chimchar yelled before she jumped at Rosa. But Naruto got between the two, stopping both before a fight could start. Easy. Cici, Rosa is my first partner. Cici glared at Rosa before she looked at Naruto. Then get rid of her and I'll be your partner. Naruto narrowed his eyes at Cici, and she flinched, not having seen that look on his face. Hiruzen and Oak looked at each other as if this looked more like a boyfriend who got cheating. Not a future trainer picking a Pokemon. Deciding not to let this play out, the two men spoke up. Now, why don't we all calm down and everyone have a seat? Rosa and Cici glared at them, making both take a step back. Stay out of this. The two men backed up, and even Naruto looked a little scared. But Naruto stood his ground and then spoke. Gigi is right. We don't need to be fighting or attacking each other. Now, we also have another Pokemon in the next room over who is trying to recover, so not fighting. The two girls nodded, and then they all sat down again. Both girls sat down at his sides, each sitting in Naruto's lap. Rosa held Naruto's right arm, and Cici held onto his shorts. None of them knew what this day would lead to in the future. So, what do you want, do Naruto? Naruto smiled as the two girls at his sides looked at him out of the corner of their eyes. I want to start my journey and I want the girls here to help me start my team. Cici and Rosa smiled. Both men knew Naruto didn't want to go home, and they figured he may never want to go back. A trainer and his Pokemon. 2 years later, Naruto smiled as he sat in the forest and watched Rosa and Leaf, the Sprigatito he'd helped spare, with Cici resting at his side. All of them had evolved to their second evolution. Leaf had evolved into Florigato, Rosa into Kirlia, and Cici into a Monferno. All of their bodies had also started to develop with their evolutions. Each was equal to a grown human woman in size and shape, which shocked Naruto at first. He did know Pokemon grow rapidly as they start to evolve. But even though he was 10, Naruto understood more than other kids his age. But, then Leaf was what Naruto learned was a shiny variant. She had eggshell white fur on her body with soft pink around her chest ears and the left-shaped fur patch on her face. He also understood that trying Pokemon at each other in a battle was stupid. Most kids around his age just wanted powerful Pokemon to fight it out. Naruto took advantage of the type advantages and the skill differences. As well as his style of battle was different. Beyond picking who was fighting, Naruto let them fight as they like and didn't keep them in Pokemon Ball. Hey Naruto. Naruto blinked as he came out of his thoughts and looked down at Cici. She fixed her bikini top as she sat up, and Naruto blushed as her tail pulled her jean shorts out, letting him see her pink panties. That is something else that made Naruto and his girls different. He bought them clothes for humans, not the poor quality clothes shops sold for Pokemon. He then looked back at Rosa and Leaf. Rosa was in a black belly shirt with black jean shorts on. She also had a hairpin of a crimson Rosa that Naruto bought her for the first year of their team. Leaf wore an outfit similar to Rosa's, but her colors were green with a yellow belt and leaf hair piece. Then Naruto looked back at Cici and saw the flame belt buckle she'd wanted. Yeah, Cici. She smiled as she stood up, and Naruto got up, too, getting Leaf's and Rosa's attention. Cici grabbed onto Naruto and jumped onto his back. Naruto grabbed her thighs as she wrapped her arms around his neck. Rosa and Leaf glared at her as she got comfy on Naruto's back. There is a fireworks show tonight. Why don't we go? Naruto hummed and nodded as he looked over at Leaf and Rosa. Do you girls want to go? They nodded, happy to go with Naruto. Naruto laughed and nodded his head as he started to walk. Come on, girls. We need to change if we're going to a fireworks show. Leaf quickly rushed up to Naruto's left side while Rosa moved to his right. They saw other people and their Pokemon fighting or walking around as they walked. It was starting to get dark. Once they got into 2, they walked through the town when they heard a weird, soft scream. The group heard a strange whine as they got close to an alley. They all looked in, and their faces went red as they looked at a large Arcanine woman with her breathes at her ankles, a man behind her with his breathes down and his hands on her waist and was moving into her. They knew what they were doing, and the group quickly moved away. All their faces were red, and Cici quickly got off Naruto. She didn't want him to be burned, but her body heated up so quickly. None of them could look back, and deciding to forget about the fireworks show, they rushed back to the house Hiruzen's family was letting them use. As they rushed, the girls couldn't help but imagine themselves and Naruto doing things like that when they were older. For his part, Naruto was trying and failing not to think the same things. They were all aware that some humans and Pokemon had romantic relationships, Rosa being the perfect example of that as she was half human. In the next few years, Naruto knew things would only get crazier as his team grew. 1 year later Naruto yelled in joy as he lifted Rosa by her waist. She had just won their team's annual amateur Pokemon MSTR tournament. Rosa blushed as she grabbed his hands as he held her up. He could finally get his Pokemon trainer license without going to the Pokemon Academy. For the last 3 years, his girls had fought hard for him, and he planned to show them his gratitude when they left the arena. But, as Naruto put her down, Rosa hugged him as she laughed. Naruto laughed as he wrapped his arms around her. Behind them, Cici and Leaf stood there, letting them have the moment as Rosa had earned the attention. Once the ceremony was done Naruto sent the girls off to have fun. 2 hours later Naruto smiled as he walked around the town, greeting everyone as he walked. But he heard thrashing as he walked, drinking a bottle of lemon soda. He looked into the alley behind a restaurant. He stopped and looked in and saw a Pokemon with a set of wings on the back. Naruto says, trying to dig into the trash. Deciding to be the nice guy he was, Naruto spoke up. Do you need some food? The Pokemon jumped, and Naruto watched it fall off a wooden box. It fell onto his back, and he heard a feminine cry of pain. Naruto threw the bottle away and then quickly rushed into the alley, and when he got close, he saw it was a Starly. She was thin but not nearly as bad as when he first met Leaf. He saw she was in a beat-up shirt and a torn-up skirt. Naruto noticed she had some bruises on her arms. Naruto helped her up, and he saw her wing was bandaged up with dirty rags. What happened to you? The Starly just looked at him, and then Naruto noticed she had a small cut on her cheek. He reached for his side bag and pulled out a clean cloth. He reached up to her face, and she grabbed his hand as tears started coming to her eyes. Worried, Naruto grabbed her other cheek. Are you okay? She sniffed a few times as she looked at him. MIMSTRA abandoned me after I lose to a new trainer's Pokemon. Naruto frowned as he looked at her, then used a thumb to wipe a tear from her eye. Naruto sighed before he threw the cloth away before he picked her up. She was smaller and lighter than the other girls, so he lifted her with no trouble. Why are some humans so cruel? The Starly didn't know if he was asking her or himself. But she didn't care. This human wasn't screaming at her or hitting her. His words had a different feel, and his soft touch was comforting. She curled into his chest, and she folded onto her back. She rested her head on his chest and quickly fell asleep, having not slept well in the last few days. When Naruto noticed she was asleep, he smiled and quickly walked down the street, heading home. I hope the girls are okay with this. Naruto soon got home and saw the lights were on. He sighed, walked up to the door, kicked on it a few times, and waited. A minute or two later, Cece opened the door, and she looked at the Starly in my arms. What happened to her? Rosa and Leaf came running after the yelling and saw the Starly. They all quickly rushed over and tried to check on her. After a minute, they let Naruto into the house, and Naruto laid her down in his room. When he returned, he saw the girls looking at him worriedly. Naruto nodded, looked down at the other couch, and explained how he found her. Once they were satisfied, they all talked about what they needed to get for her. It was decided that Cece and Leaf would take her to the Pokemon Center and then go to get clothes. While Naruto and Rosa would go and get her daily needs, and would look into her former trainer. 2 days later, at Oak's lab, Naruto walked into the lab, blushing while the other girls were outside talking to the other female Pokemon. Naruto had walked in a while carrying a bag of seeds for Professor Oak. He'd walked in on a female Ninetales while she was getting changed near the barn. And by God, she was well curved and had a nice heart-shaped butt. Her golden yellow and red fur was almost like fire with her sharp red eyes as she looked at him. Naruto had also seen Rosa coming. His was with a female Gardevoir, but she had normal colors. Naruto looked around for a second before he had to dodge a large book and looked into the side and saw Professor Oak as he struggled with a small Pokemon. Naruto saw it was a Riolu. Riolus have natural superhuman strength, stamina, and endurance. It can make long journeys on foot in a short amount of time. It is a playful, energetic, and loyal Pokemon. But this one looked panicked and scared. Naruto could make out the more female sound to the yells as she broke free. Naruto got a good look at her now and saw she had bandages all around her, with a few large bandage pads on her hips and one on her face. She was in a medical gown with her tail out the back. I won't go back to that man. Naruto saw the panic in her eyes, and deciding what he wanted to do, he rushed forward. As the Riolu was running, Naruto grabbed and lifted her into a hug. Riolu started to panic more and was fighting for a second but noticed this human wasn't trying to restrain her but hugging her. A second later, she was back on her paws and looked at the human. This human was much younger and had 6 scars on his face, 3 on each cheek. But his eyes are what caught her attention. His eyes were so soft and kind, with such a soft and bright aura around him, that she instantly relaxed as he held her. Seeing her panic was passing, Naruto picked her up, and she sat on his arm. How did you do that? Naruto looked over at Professor Oak and shrugged as he held her. Not sure. But Pokemon have always just seemed to calm down around me. It's so soft and bright. Naruto and Oak looked at her as she put her hands on Naruto's upper chest. She was still looking into Naruto's eyes as she spoke again. You're not like that man people call my MSTR. His is hard and dark. I don't like that man or the beatings. Naruto narrowed his eyes, then looked over at Oak, and he looked away. Naruto nodded before he spoke. You're going to tell that trainer she ran off, and if you don't, I'll break the Pokeball because she's not going back. Riolu looked away from Naruto, glaring at Professor Oak and baring her small fangs. Professor Oak looked away after seeing that Naruto wouldn't let him send her back. He didn't want to, but he couldn't let another trainer take an owned Pokemon. Then he sighed as he looked at Naruto, knowing what he was about to do would get in trouble if it ever got out. Naruto, that Riolu did run away after she destroyed her Pokeball. But, she can't come back here and you'll have to evolve her as fast as you can. Naruto understood what he was saying. Naruto smiled and nodded as he looked at her. Thank Oak. Naruto then looked at her again. Well, before we get you in some proper clothes, we need to get you a name if you don't have one. I don't. Naruto hummed as he started to walk to the door leading to the supply room. How does Lucy sound? I like it. Naruto smiled as he found another team member. He only needed one more to make it a full 6. He also noticed all his team members were girls, but that didn't bother him. 1 year later Naruto, now 12, sighed as he laid back on a tree in the eastern forest of Alola. Rosa and Star were sparing, and Leaf and Cece were sparing near the river. At his side, lying beside him, was Lucy. A new, fully evolved Lucario was the only member of his team who was in her final evolution, and Naruto nearly lost it when she evolved. She had evolved into a very well-curved and busty Lucario who liked to wear low-waist jean shorts that hugged her hips and heart-shaped but too well. And up top, a tank that barely covered enough to count as clothes with her BRST size. She was twice, if not more, the size of Tsunade if she had to guess. Making her much bigger than any human Naruto would ever see. As Naruto leaned up, Lucy suddenly snapped up, her teeth bared as she looked at the forest behind her and Naruto. She got up and put herself between Naruto and the trees and got all the girls' attention. They stopped and watched as a female Pokemon walked out and they all gasped as they saw her. She was badly beaten up, and she had some BLD coming from the side of her mouth. She had many feline features with primarily yellow and black fur. She had huge leaves covering her huge bust that was at least bigger than Lucy's, with curves twice the size of Lucy's. Her fur is thinner and black on her lower legs, lower body, upper arms, and face. Naruto, seeing her holding her side and her left leg, looked bad. See the state she was in. Naruto grabbed his bag, quickly opened it, and grabbed the medical bag. He pulled out one of the few max potions in the bag. Naruto walked past Lucy and got close to her. But Naruto saw her flex her claws as he got close. Hang on, this will help. Rosa pulled Naruto back with her telekinesis as the female threw her arm at him. Her claws tore through the tree, sending wood flying everywhere. But she then fell down from the pain of her wounds. She grabbed her leg as she looked at them, her sharp blue eyes staring at them. Stay back, human. I won't be harmed by your kind again. Naruto looked at her sadly. Then he waved his hand as he was about to talk, but Lucy jumped over, slammed her knee into her back, and grabbed her arms. Naruto saw the anger in her eyes as she glared at the woman. Our MSTR isn't like that other useless human and never think he is again. Lucy. Get off her. Naruto yelled, shocking the girls as he hadn't yelled at one of them before. Lucy, shocked, did as she was told as Naruto got to his feet and walked over to the downed female. Naruto sat the max potion down in front of her. The female looked at it and then up at Naruto. It will heal all your wounds and will leave the area to leave you alone. The female watched him turn his back to her, and she noticed the Pokemon around him as he walked away were all female. They all also looked like they were well taken care of. They were in real clothes and looked well fed. They didn't look like the Pokemon the other humans had. This human was much younger than the one attacking her with his Pokemon. Wait. They all stopped and looked back at her as she pushed herself up with her good arm. She looked at Naruto. Seeing his eyes that were still soft but had a look to them showed he'd seen things. She knew by looking at those eyes, he'd seen what this world was, and that was something she'd never seen among humans. Only other Pokemon who'd been forced to fight like mindless animals. Why are you leave me something to heal me? I just tried to attack you. Naruto blinked as he looked at her, then sighed as he started to walk back over to her. He grabbed the max potion, grabbed her wounded arm, and started to spray as he talked. I've seen the worst humans can and will do to Pokemon and I try to be better. All the girls you see with me were abused in some way by humans, and I've become their monster after we met. Now, we are on vacation here for a week before returning to challenge Kanto's Elite Four and Lance for the title of champion. My goal is to make our names as trainers, and Pokemon are so well known that when they all see how well we've done, it may change things if only a little to start. The female looked at Naruto for a few seconds not noticing she was healed up. When she noticed, she pulled her arm back as she looked at him. She held her arm and blinked as she looked around at the other girls. She liked her lips before she stood and nodded thanks before she turned and went back into the forest, her mind full of questions. She had thought all humans were the same, but this young human made her start to rethink her view of humans. Naruto sighed again once. She was deep in the first, then he turned and put his smile back on when Rosa and Leaf grabbed his hands. Let's head back to the cabin. I want to lay down now. They all nodded as they quickly left the forest, knowing Naruto was upset about having to think of his past. He'd told them all his past, and each promised that when they had the chance, they would put that family in their place. 2 days went by, and Lucy told them that a female was watching them, but she moved back when Star evolved into a Staravia. Naruto was the room as Star evolved and was the size of a large teen woman with a great figure. She had a double D cup with a thick set of thighs and butt. But what made Naruto run from the room was her clothes being torn apart from the size change. But on the next day, while all the girls were off to get Star a new wardrobe of clothes, Naruto went on a walk in the forest, knowing the female was following him. He'd seen her yellow fur behind some trees as he walked into the forest. He walked back to the area where he'd first seen her and sat back down under that tree again. He leaned back into the tree and closed his eyes, knowing she would come out when she was ready. He only had to wait a few minutes before he heard footsteps. Human. Naruto opened an eye to look at her. She looked roughed up again, but nowhere near as bad as when they first met. He also noticed the look in her eye was different. They softened up some. Can I help you? The female looked at him for a few more seconds before she sat down on her knees and looked at him. You said you wanted to see change even if it's only a little. Naruto hummed as this was what he expected her to start with. Naruto leaned up and crossed arms as he looked at her. Yeah, I want to change this world if only a little. The female hummed as she looked at him and then nodded her head. Okay then. Hit me with it. Naruto blinked as the female looked at him. I don't have Pokemon Ball on me. The female looked surprised before speaking again. Wait, you're out here without your females. Where are they if they're not with you right now? Naruto laughed a little before standing up and holding his hand out to her. She looked at his hand, then took it, and Naruto helped her back up to her paws. Naruto then noticed just how tall she was compared to him. She was a good 2 heads taller than he was. But he blushed as he noticed. She had to be a KK cup at the biggest, and her hips were easily twice the size of Star's. Naruto shook his head before he spoke. I let the girls hold on to their Pokeballs as a promise. I will never force them to do anything. Now, if you saying what I think you are, I'll hand it over to once it's said and done. But, before all that, do you have a name or do you want one? The female smiled as she looked at Naruto. Just call me by my race Zeraora. A trainer and his Pokemon 6 years later with 18-year-old Naruto. Naruto's heart swelled with pride as he gazed at the case, a testament to their journey. It held 4 sets of gym badges and 3 champion trophies, each accompanied by a letter of recommendation from the former champions. He had offered the girls the chance to continue as champions team, but they had all declined. A soft chuckle escaped him, a mix of amusement and fondness, as he turned to the window. His gaze fell upon Cece, Star, Leaf, and Lucy, their laughter echoing across the field from the small river of their home in Kanto. What are you doing? Naruto's smile widened as he heard Zeraora's voice. He turned with his arms behind his back and saw her leaning on the wall in a white tank top and jeans. But around her neck was the sky blue scarf Naruto had bought her back when she soloed an Elite Four team, a token of his fondness and admiration for her. Oh, just thinking back is all. Is Rosa still asleep in her room upstairs? Zeraora nodded as she walked over and looked down at Naruto. Naruto laughed, a sound filled with camaraderie and affection, as now he came up to her lower jaw. Naruto patted her side before he walked over to the door to his room and opened it. He left it open like always, a sign all the girls recognized as an invitation. They could come in and talk, grab whatever they may need from him, or lay down with him as all the girls did occasionally. Naruto had started doing this after Lucy joined the team. In one bad thunderstorm, she came banging at his door in the middle of the night. As soon as he opened the door, she was clinging to his waist, shaking from her past traumas. Naruto had picked her up and lay with Lucy, burying her face in his chest under the blanket. Thinking back again. Naruto laughed as he should have guessed Zeraora would follow him into his room. Naruto looked at the standing mirror and saw his body. Naruto had trained his body into the ground, and it paid off. He had a fine six-pack with a good-sized chest with his shoulder muscles twice the size of his former father's. Naruto flexed his arm and smiled as he saw Zeraora blush a bright blue before she looked away. He smiled as he noticed many female Pokemon and women glancing at him. Naruto laughed as he looked at her and leaned back into his bed frame. Naruto saw her blush grow brighter as she looked at him out of the corner of her eye. See something you like? Naruto laughed at her blushing glare, but she didn't deny it. Naruto nodded as he stopped smiling before she walked around the bed and fell back. He bounced on the bed and looked up at the roof. So what do you need? Zeraora quickly walked over and lay beside him, her back to him. She rested her head on Naruto's arm, and he knew what she wanted. Naruto reached over with his other hand and ran his fingers through her head and down her neck, stopping at the edge of her tank top. Then he ran his hand over the fabric. Then wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her back into him. Zeraora smiled as she gave a little purr from the contact. Zeraora had learned quickly that all the females in this team were rather attached to Naruto. She also learned why soon after she joined in. Naruto was a man, any woman or female who'd die to have him. He cooked, cleaned, listened to them, and was there when they wanted. He knew when to leave them alone, but most of all, he didn't force them to do anything. He let them hold on to the Pokeballs at all times except for battles. As Zeraora purred, she felt Naruto start rubbing her stomach like she liked. She felt Naruto as he leaned his head closer, and she didn't mind it at all. Who's my girl? Zeraora's blush stayed bright as she let Naruto do as he liked. He'd never gone beyond this unless she wanted it, she loved the attention. Zeraora grabbed his hand with her left hand as her legs tried to kick against her will, and she loved how he rubbed her fur. I am. Naruto laughed a little as he rubbed circles into her stomach. He then turned the arm she was resting her head on and reached under her chin. He scratched under her chin, and Zeraora started to purr a little louder. Her right hand started kneading into the bed, her claws pulling on the blanket. No, fair Zeraora. Naruto and Zeraora jumped at the sudden yell and looked at the door. Standing there was Cici with Star behind her. Naruto laughed as he let go of Zeraora, having learned anger female Pokemon were deadly, even more so if those females were an Infernape and a Staraptor. Both of them are taller and have bigger muscles than him. But Naruto also gave them a once-over. Star and Cici were like him, having taken to working out like him but maintaining their female figures. With heart-shaped hips and butt. Both were still in their bikinis. Cici's was a bright purple, and Star was in a darker blue. I want to be pted too. Leaf broke past the two and rushed over to the bed. Naruto cringed, knowing what was coming. She had a more chubby body, while Leaf was the same height as him. Her E-cup BRST slammed into his face as she took him off the bed and left her round bubble in the air. She was in a nice black one-piece swimsuit. Behind all of them stood Lucy as she laughed at Naruto's misfortune. She could hear Zeraora yelling for her to get off Naruto, as it was her time for the pets. Lucy nodded as she looked at the steps and saw Rosa coming down. Her long red hair was tied back, and she was dressed in sweatpants and one of Naruto's shirts. Sleep well? Lucy asked with a smile as Rosa walked over to the door with a frown. Cici and Star moved, knowing not to get between her and Naruto when she wanted him. Rosa walked in and saw Zeraora trying to pull Leaf off Naruto as she demanded he give her pets and belly rubs too. Rosa smiled and nodded as she looked at them. Naruto tried not to get scratched by Leaf's claws as the annoyed Zeraora pulled her one piece. Once she got tired of hearing the yelling that woke her up, she used her psychic power to pick the three up. Zeraora growled as she looked over at Rosa as they were all pulled apart. You're not taking Naruto again. It's my turn to have his attention. Rosa rolled her eyes as she set them all back down. I know. Besides, the last time I took him was because Oak wanted to talk to him. Now I just wanted to know why I was woke up by all the yelling. Naruto laughed as he rubbed the back of his head and looked at her. Yeah, sorry, Rosa. Rosa nodded, then she looked at Zeraora and Leaf. You two don't forget Naruto has to go with Lucy to the Pokemart to buy everything we need. You and I are going to the professor because we need to get the items before we leave for the All region. Zeraora nodded, knowing they did need to get that done. Once it was all settled, everyone but Naruto and Zeraora left the room. Before Naruto could say anything, Zeraora tackled Naruto back onto the bed with her arms around his neck. Get back to the scratching. Naruto laughed as he started to scratch her stomach again. Zeraora started purring again as she rolled onto her side to let Naruto have more room to give her attention. Naruto smiled as he laid back down on his side, and Zeraora quickly cuddled into his side as he moved from her side to her upper stomach. Naruto didn't want another punch if he got too close to them again. He'd made that mistake once, and she'd nearly broken his nose. But, his mind drifted to what had happened in his home region. His father had nearly lost his spot as an Elite Four, and he lost all rights to his share sell of Elite Four merchandise for a year, which Naruto had heard hit his finances hard. His mother, a well-known water Pokemon MSTR, lost her breeder and trainer licenses. His siblings were denied entry into the training school for 4 years, so they'd be crippled for their trainer careers. They couldn't have more than 2 Pokemon and couldn't take on gyms nor take part in paying tournaments. Why did you stop petting? Naruto blinked, then realized he had stopped petting her. Naruto nodded his head before he spoke. Sorry, my mind don't seem to want to work with me today. Zeraora frowned as she turned and grabbed his cheek as she looked him in the eye. You know you can talk if you need to. Naruto smiled and nodded as he ran his fingers over her left cheek. I know you girls have been a godsend and have helped me as much as I hope I've helped you all. Zeraora laughed as she moved her hand down his throat and stopped at his chest. She purred as Naruto started to rub near her ear, feeling the heartbeat under his skin. Naruto sighed as he grabbed the back of her head and then pulled her closer and kissed her nose. Zeraora turned bright blue and looked away, making Naruto chuckle. He loved how embarrassed she could get but also knew how much she loved the attention. But then the side Naruto knew saw coming came. Zeraora growled before she grabbed his cheeks and glared into his eyes while still blushing. "I told you to stop that." Naruto only smiled as he looked into her glare. "You know you love then attention." Zeraora glowed more, then smiled and quickly pulled him into a kiss. Naruto wrapped an arm over her and pulled her more into him. A few seconds later, Zeraora broke the kiss, smiling as she pressed her forehead to Naruto's. "I hate that you can read me so easily." Naruto laughed as he held her to his chest. He reached his other hand up and rubbed her cheek with his right thumb. "You know you girls spoil me too much." Zeraora laughed as she rested her head on her arm and closed her eyes to get some sleep. She knew she could stay with Naruto as long as she wanted. But Naruto's mind still had to wonder what else happened after he left. Back in the All region 9 years ago, it had been 2 months since the news broke of Naruto and what happened in the family's home. The neglect, the favoritism of the 2 younger children, and the near isolation he'd endured. Soon, the surrounding clans were looked into, and found many of the people of the clans followed the boy's family. Only a few were saved from the shame and judgment of the law. Like Kushina, Uzumaki had breeder and trainer licenses taken away as trust was lost. But the harsher punishment fell on Naruto and Menma. The academy they were trying to get into refused to admit them after it was known. And what's worse, the school only had 3 classes of 40 for 4 years. They would have to enter at 14, crippling their trainer career. At the Namikaze Uzumaki house, Minato sat in his chair, his face in his hands, as he wished he'd listened to Hiruzen. They should have given Naruto their attention and a Pokemon. If they had, the whole region wouldn't be out for his place as an Elite Four, and his wife would still have her licenses. His other children would be in the academy, and his firstborn would make his name with them. Instead, he was off to another region, making a name for himself. Minato. Minato jumped in his seat and looked at the door as the banging and yelling came again. "Get out here, you DMN disgrace. You know you have to go to the gym and serve as witness of the new water gym leader." Minato sighed as he heard Hiruzen's voice as he hit the door. He got up, grabbed his pokeballs, and approached the door. He heard all the anger in Hiruzen's voice as he yelled. Soon, he was at the door, opened it, and nearly got punched in the face. He took a step back and looked at his former idol. Once filled with kindness, his eyes looked at him with a hateful glare. Minato already knew he didn't have a choice. So he turned and called out. "Kushina. Kids. It's time to go." Soon, footsteps came down the steps, and Minato looked back and saw Hiruzen was gone. Minato knew their lives would be hard now, but he wished Hiruzen had at least heard him out. But Minato knew that maybe years down the line. 5 years ago, in the All region, Minato and Kushina blinked as they watched the TV with their kids and Tsunade, watching the newest challenger to the Kanto champion. There with an all-female Pokemon team was Naruto. His team comprised of a red, black, and white Gardevoir in a blue dress. A shiny Meowscarada with a pair of shorts. And a black bikini top. Beside her was a larger Staravia wearing jeans and a yellow shirt. Next was a Monferno in jeans shorts with a pink tank top on. Second to last was a Lucario in a pair of black jeans with a blank tank top and a sleeveless jacket. The last was shocking as they saw a Zeraora of all Pokemon with her head on Naruto's. Her arms wrapped around his neck, and her hands holding onto his shoulders. She had a pair of blue jeans, one with a torn t-shirt and a faded Bad Beach on her back. They were all shocked at the team he'd built, while Menma was beyond said that his loser brother had many appealing female Pokemon around him. He then smiled as he started to plan to steal his brother's team by any means, as he was the one who deserved those Pokemon. Little did he know the hell that would one day come back to him for those thoughts. A trainer and his Pokemon. Please comment, like and follow the story. Naruto sighed as he walked down the street away from the airport. Naruto adjusted the coat on his shoulder jacket, its black fabric reaching his ankles. The jacket had white lighting bolts on his back. He wore a white shirt with 2 black lines across his chest, making an X. He also had some black jeans and a set of black shoes. He had his hair tied back in a ponytail. But, what was unusual about his dress was a set of Pokemon ball on his hip. Naruto did his best to hide his face as he walked through the city. Once he reached the city's edge, he walked into the forest and texted Hiruzen. After a few seconds, Naruto smiled to see the response. "I'll have them there in a little while. It will be good to see you again, Naruto." Naruto knew he would get a van or car to him in an hour at most, but that was such a fast response. Naruto sighed as he exited the city without his fan club seeing him. They'd come in on a private plane to ensure their fan clubs couldn't rush them. Naruto didn't need Rosa, Lucy, or Zeraora trying to kill fanboys again. Once Naruto was sure he was far enough away, Naruto pulled out all the girls' Pokeballs and threw them into the air. "Alright, sorry for the long wait, girls." The girls materialized as the Pokeballs burst open, now clad in simpler versions of their battle attire. In a striking black and red dress, Rosa stood tall in her black heels. On the other hand, Leaf sported a more casual look with her short jeans shorts, plaid button-up shirt, and a black belt cinching her waist. Beside her was Star in her blue jeans and had on a blue shirt with a leather jacket. She had her head feathers pushed to the side and had her hands in the jacket pockets. Next was Lucy, in a yoga outfit with her lower legs wrapped in bandages. Cece stretched out with one arm over her head, her black jeans stretched tight. Her blue and white bikini barely holding her bust back. She had a necklace that Naruto had bought her after she nearly killed a pervert who grabbed her butt, and he needed to calm her down. Last, and before he could turn to look at her, Zeraora's arms were around his neck again, and he felt her lean into him. "I hate that DMN ball." Naruto laughed as he reached back and scratched her chin. She started to purr as her tail swayed from side to side. All the girls were jealous as they looked at her. But the only one who spoke up was Rosa. With her arms crossed, she spoke up. "You really need to stop trying to hog his attention. You know the deal, Zeraora." Zeraora growled at Rosa but knew she was right. Zeraora bit Naruto's ear before she stood up and crossed her arms. Naruto laughed before he walked over to a downed tree. He threw his jacket back and sat down on it. He rested his forearms on his knees before he spoke up. "I got my old friend Hiruzen getting a van or car this way. I'd rather ride than walk like me and Rosa did the first time." Rosa laughed as she walked over. Rosa moved her dress to the side before she sat down beside him. "Yeah, I remember those days fondly. You were the first human to show me love and kindness." Naruto laughed as he reached up with his right hand and cupped Rosa's cheek. She smiled as she moved her long black hair back and looked at me with a smile. "Maybe we should find that old cave again." Laughing, Naruto nodded as he rubbed his thumb on her cheek. As he did, Star walked over and sat down in front of Naruto, and he knew what she was after. Naruto lifted his left hand, pulled her jacket up, and started to scratch her between the wings. Star made a cooing sound, and she loved the scratching. Leaf, the spoiled kitten of the group, puffed up her cheeks and walked over to the fallen tree. She sat down, leaned into him, and rubbed her cheek into Naruto's. Naruto decided to have a little fun. He gave her a small lick like she did every once in a while. Leaf's whitish fur turned red before she growled at him. She grabbed his jacket and gave him a small shack. "Don't play with me." Everyone laughed. Leaf acted like a child again. Lucy, Cece, and Zeraora were happy to let the other have the affection for now. With a sigh, Zeraora approached a tree and used a plasma fist to break down the tree to make another set of seats. Naruto laughed as he heard the echo of the plasma impact. He took his hand off Rosa's cheek, looked at the others, and saw them sitting on the tree. Naruto laughed as he knew soon all hell would break loose. 1 hour later, Naruto smiled as he hugged Hiruzen as they talked. The girls were happy to see Naruto talking and hugging the man they'd talked about. Once the two had finished, they all got into the large van, and Hiruzen's son, Asuma, started to drive them back. But he was a little scared as he had one of the most powerful Pokemon teams in 4 regions. Naruto had 2 Pokemon who soloed gyms and Elite 4 teams, and 4 other Pokemon who've leveled top trainers across regions. Asuma feared what would happen if Naruto's family started trouble. Even his father's team couldn't stand up to this team. Relax, Uncle Asuma. Asuma jumped and looked at Naruto in the review mirror. Naruto was smiling as Zeraora and Lucy both had on their shoulders, and Naruto was leaning back in the seat. His right leg was crossed over his left, but it was his eyes. They were like a Pokemon who was ready to kill a human. He also noticed the same look in all the girls' eyes. Hiruzen had also noticed the looks but wasn't scared like his son. Hiruzen had seen that look before and knew Naruto was here to prove something. But his Pokemon looked like a set-off lover or a wife who'd seen her husband in danger. Hiruzen, while not caring for Minato anymore, also didn't want him harmed. Deciding to do something, Hiruzen silently pulled his phone out and unblocked Minato. Better to warn him now than see the BLD later. Naruto smiled as he noticed Hiruzen's shoulder moving slowly as his hand moved. Naruto could guess he was sending a warning to his former family. That was fine by Naruto as he had another Pokemon to add to the team before confronting his old man. By now, Scarlet should have evolved and he did keep his promises after all. 2 hours later Naruto sighed as he walked through the forest with the girls around him. Once they got out of the van, they'd given Hiruzen and all the others the slip. Naruto smiled once he reached the pin forest. Seeing the claw marks on the trees, his smile turned into a frown. What happened here? As Naruto looked around, she noticed signs of a fight. He walked deeper into the pin forest and saw a downed male Ursaring. It looked like he'd taken one hell of a beating. Leave, human. Naruto blinked as he heard the voice from above him. He looked up and saw a large woman standing there dressed in large rags that looked like they came from a bedsheet from a set Naruto knew very well. She was about the same size, if not a little shorter, than Zeraora, with a similar build and body shape. He smiled as he looked at her, stood up, and spoke with crossed arms. Good to see you're still as spirited as ever, Scarlet. The female body went stiff momentarily before jumping from her place and landing in front of Naruto. He smiled as he heard the girls coming in close, ready to back him up. He smiled as he got a look at her. Her coat is pale blue, and its fur is more flowing and wispier. The tips of her tails, crest, and the lower halves of its legs are white. He smiled as he saw the small scar over her right eye. He also noticed a few new scars on her arm and one on her left thigh. Been a while, Scarlet. Before he could finish, the large fox woman grabbed his collar and pulled him close to her. She sniffed his neck a few times before her eyes widened as she looked at him. Naru. Naruto laughed as he looked at her. Good to see you still remember my scent, Scarlet, and I'm glad you kept the name I gave you. Scarlet and Alolan, Ninetales' eyes started to tear up, and she bared her teeth. She pulled him off his feet and started to shake him. Naruto smirked as she shocked him. Where the hell have you been? I heard you vanished, and now after 10 years, you suddenly show back up. Do you have any idea how worried I was about you? Before Naruto could even try and stop her, Zeraora's arms were around Scarlet's neck. Naruto saw rage in her eyes. Then Zeraora spoke, her voice sharp like a knife. Drop my MSTR or I'll break you. Scarlet growled before she dropped Naruto. She kicked off the ground hard and set them both flying back fast. Zeraora was surprised before her back smashed back into a tree. Zeraora was stunned by the sudden slam and her arms loosened up. Scarlet turned and grabbed Zeraora's shirt and charged up an attack. Zeraora, on the other hand, started to charge her plasma fist. Scarlet, Zeraora, both of you stop. The two stopped dead, neither of them wanting to make Naruto angry. Zeraora knew Naruto would cut her out of the rotation of affection he showed. Still, Scarlet was shocked that Naruto had yelled at her. He'd never yelled at her when they were younger, but then she realized she was about to attack one of his Pokemon. The two quickly broke away from each other. Zeraora glared at her before she walked back over to Naruto and saw the other ready to jump in. Girls, all of you give me your pokeballs and head for the outskirts of the pin forest. Scarlet and I need to take it. All the girls looked at him, shocked, and Lucy spoke up. Naruto, we can't just leave you here without someone to back you up. Let at least 2 of us stay with you. Naruto looked back at Lucy and figured she was right about that. Fine Lucy, you and Rosa will be with me, the rest of you. Your pokeballs so nobody and try and take them to steal you. All the others nodded before throwing their pokeballs over to him and walking away. Once they were gone, Naruto sighed before Scarlet grabbed him again and hugged him tightly. He laughed a little as his face was buried into Scarlet's neck. He wrapped his arms around her lower back and then lifted her and spun her, making her laugh. Naruto did this a lot when she was just a Vulpix, and she loved it. They let go of each other when he sat her back on her feet. It's nice to see you're still alive, Naruto. A lot of us in the forest thought that you were dead when a year went by. Naruto laughed more as he rubbed the back of his head. Yeah, sorry. When I ran I just took off after I finally had enough. But, I can't say I regret it. I built a team that have made themselves new legends and they became my family. Scarlet nodded, understanding his perspective. She was sad that she wasn't part of that family. That one reason I'm here, Scarlet. You were one of the first Pokemon who'd welcomed me with open arms. I've come to ask you to join my family. After hearing that, Scarlet tackled Naruto to the ground in a hug. Roas and Lucy were about to grab her but stopped when they heard sniffing. They looked down and saw Scarlet trying to hold her tears back. Naruto wrapped an arm around her shoulders and sat them both up. Scarlet had a fist full of his jacket as he rubbed her back. She was shaking, and Naruto, Rosa, and Lucy all guessed she'd had a hard life alone. She pulled back after a minute and spoke as tears ran down her face. Why, you have no idea how happy I am to hear that. Naruto smiled, then reached into his side back and pulled out a Pokeball. Well, let's get this done and you'll be staying with me since you won't be in a battle unless you want to. You'll be an extra since I've never filled that slot. After that we'll meet back up with the others and then we'll go and get you some proper clothes and food. Scarlet nodded before she took the Pokeball and pressed the button against her chest. She turned into red energy and flew into the Pokeball. The ball fell to the ground, and he was shocked 3 times before sounding captured. See that Naruto quickly grabbed the Pokeball and threw it into the air. It opened, and Scarlet reappeared in a white light. She shook her head and looked at Naruto with a smile. Scarlet laughed before they stood up. Naruto held her Pokeball out to her, and she took it. She'd guessed that all the girls kept their Pokeballs as a sign of some kind. She slipped the small ball into the side of her skirt. Naruto took her hand, and Lucy growled as Rosa glared at their hands. But Naruto smiled as he pulled her close, and she smiled before rubbing her cheek on his. We'll have to make up for lost time, Naru. I remember how we cuddled up when it was cold, but I don't like that you have so many different scents on you without mine. Lucy growled louder, knowing what she was trying to do. Rosa narrowed her eyes as she looked at Scarlet, knowing a challenge when she saw it. But both knew Naruto would stop them if they tried to harm her. They looked at her with some envy as she clung to Naruto. Once it was clear that they would have to put up with this, they all walked back to the others. When the rest of the girls saw Scarlet holding on to Naruto, they all wanted to rip her off him. But seeing Naruto made it clear they needed to be nice to her. When Naruto saw his message got across, he tossed them their Pokeballs back. But he understood why they were so upset. Nobody had joined the team for almost 5 years, and all the girls were close and trusted each other. Now, he was bringing in a new girl who knew him, and they seemed very close. So who is this? Naruto laughed as he heard Leaf's voice. He rubbed the back of his head and smiled as he spoke. This is Scarlet, one of the first Pokemon I befriended as a child. You could say she's one of my oldest friends. All the girls looked at her, and each understood this was a strong threat to their way of life. None of the girls would give up their place in this team or the attention Naruto gave them. They had worked hard to earn places in Naruto's heart and as his family. Naruto looked at them, and he could see what they were thinking. Girls, you all are my family, and there is no need to think any of you could ever be replaced or lose that. Besides, it never hurts to add to the family, does it? All the girls blushed, and Scarlet smiled, fine with being part of the family. Once Naruto was sure all the girls were happy, they returned to Hiruzen's house. While they walked, Naruto was planning where their home would be built. Thanks to the girls and the investments he'd been making, they had a fortune with quarterly payments. They owned 15% of Pokemart, which paid out a solid $100,000 with 2 other big investments. They also owned 20% of Pokeball manufacturers and 18% of the food trade spread over 3 regions. He also knew someone was going to try and take his girls from him. A crazy breeder tried to buy Rosa from him in Unova. Naruto had beaten the man after he'd grabbed Rosa. He laughed under his breath as they walked out of the forest. To his surprise, waiting, there were 2 people he didn't expect to see so soon. Minato and Kushina were standing there alone. He also noticed neither had their Pokeballs on them. Naruto heard growling from Lucy and Zeraora. Leaf and Star got in front of Naruto, ready to tear them apart. Rosa and Cici waited to see what Naruto wanted to do but were ready to attack them. Scarlet felt Naruto's body tense up. She looked at the other humans and growled as she guessed these 2 weren't good. Naruto narrowed his eyes as he looked at them. "Why are you 2 here?" His voice was laced with venom, and they all watched them flinch. Seeing that, Naruto smirked, but then Kushina let go of Minato's hand and stepped towards them all. But Zeraora clenched her fist, and electricity started to flow from her. Kushina stopped, and she stepped back, making Zeraora stop the electricity. Naruto sighed before he rubbed the back of his head and pulled the arm Scarlet held onto. She frowned but let him go, and he walked past the girls. "Girls, go ahead and find a seat me and the blonde F and his slot need to take." His formed parents looked at him, shocked at his words, but were more put off by the look in his eyes. He stopped a good 4 feet away from them, and he looked ready for a fight. Minato was glad Hiruzen had sent him a worry. They looked at Naruto and saw how much he'd changed. The 2 most obvious were his size compared to them and that his whisker birthmarks were faded to sets of faint lines that gave him a wild look. Once she finished with the once-over, Kushina spoke again. "And Naruto, can you come back home so we can talk?" Naruto stood there, his arms crossed, as he looked at her. Kushina looked at Naruto, wondering if he would come with them. For years she and Minato had been regretting what they had done. And now, her oldest son was in front of her with eyes full of disdain. "I'm not going anywhere with you 2. Also, I want to make this clear to you 2. I want nothing to do with you, your brats, or the clans aside from Hiruzen Gigi's clan and maybe a few Uchihas." The 2 looked hurt at his words, and Minato took a few steps toward him. "Naruto, please, we're sorry. We understand that you may still be angry with us but please we knew we wronged so." Before Minato could finish, Naruto was angry with him, trying to get too close. He punched Minato in the face with a fast jab he didn't see coming. Minato dropped to the ground and grabbed his nose as he started to get up. Kushina looked on in horror as she saw BLD coming out of the hand holding his nose. Minato looked up and saw his son ready to throw another punch. They noticed how well-muscled he was. Then they heard laughing behind him. They looked back and saw all the girls laughing at them. Kushina, angered by the laugh, yelled at them. "Shut up." The next thing Kushina knew, she got a strong punch to the stomach. The force dropped her to her knees, and she coughed as she held her stomach. She looked up with shock and pain in her eyes and saw Naruto had moved fast and had punched her. Minato, seeing his son punching his mother, tried to jump up at Naruto to stop him. "Naruto." Naruto smiled before landing a fast 1-2 into Minato's face. Minato fell face first to the ground, out cold. Naruto smirked as he looked down at his former father. He was glad he'd gotten so much training from a former pro-human boxer. One of the few sports that was human-dominated rather than Pokemon. He relaxed his stand and let out a breath before he stood back straight up and put his hands back into his pockets. I feel better now. He turned and started to walk back to the girls. Hey, when he wakes up tell him that was the only warning you all get. Kushina stayed quiet, afraid she might get punched if she spoke again. So, all she could do was watch her oldest son walk away after attacking them. She looked back down at her husband and saw his bloody face and saw his face already bruising. Kushina was scared seeing her son's strength and was afraid of when Naruto met Menma again. Menma blamed Naruto for what had happened to him after seeing this. She knew if Menma did something, Naruto was going to beat him, too. A trainer and his Pokemon. 1 week later Naruto smiled as he sat back in a chair in the restate office, reading a book with all the girls around him. After explaining what they wanted, they'd come to buy land and offer to pay in full for at least 20 acres with a contract to build a house with 10 rooms and 12 bathrooms. Naruto wanted all the girls to have their own space, 2 guest rooms, and 2 more bathrooms for guests to use on the ground floor. All the agents were rushing to try and find land the size he requested and a designer for their home. Sir. Naruto looked up from his book and saw a woman standing there. Naruto closed his book and looked at her. Yes, ma'am. She smiled before she spoke. We have the land and designer. The designer will be in tomorrow morning. As for the land, if you'd like to see it on the side of town. The only land plots that are of the size you need will be about half a mile in the forest. They are near the river used by water-type trainers. Naruto nodded, and he and the girls stood up. Naruto thanked her for the time and said they would be back tomorrow. The group walked back into the city, and Naruto sighed as he saw a few fangirls and fanboys with phones taking pictures and a few trying to get close. They all saw that and quickly got into the large Sprinter luxury van Naruto bought the day after they arrived. The windows were dark enough nobody could see in. Naruto quickly got into the driver's. Rosa jumped into the passenger front seat with all the girls into the back. Quickly, Naruto was driving back to Hiruzen's clan compound, where they all stayed in a guest house. Naruto, however, did not look forward to going back. He'd been on edge waiting for the whole of his former family to try something. Naruto rested his arm on the window edge as he let his mind wander back to the beginning of the week. News broke the same day he'd beaten Minato and punched Kushina for yelling at his girls. He'd been invited to a news interview to explain his actions. Naruto had said he'd let his anger get the better of him now. But, after being confronted with his neglectful parents telling him to return home, he'd snapped. You got that look again. Naruto snapped out of it and looked in the rearview mirror at Lucy. Her worried look made him smile. Don't worry Lucy, I was just letting my mind wander too much. I just got the feeling something is going to happen. Ever since the news interview my former family has been quiet. All the girls understood where he was coming from. They were all waiting for a fight to come. Lucy, Zeraora, and Rosa wanted his mother and father to return. They wanted to rip them a new one, while Scarlet, Leaf, Star, and Cece were happy to wait for them to show themselves. Who and before I forget. Whose turn is it tonight? Rosa smiled as all the girls frowned. Mine. Naruto smiled as he trusted them to keep the peace and respect of whatever deal they made. Naruto turned onto the street to the compounds. But, as they drove down the streets, they all saw some of the gates were closed. Soon, they arrived at Hiruzen's compound and saw well over a dozen cars. Naruto could also see the kids of his age group waiting out with his siblings with their starts out. Menma's Froakie had evolved into its final form as Greninja and Naruto's Sliggoo and became its final form, Gudra. Menma had put on weight and was short for his age. Naruto was also short, but she was at least thinner than Menma was. Naruto recognized all of them, and he grunted as he knew what was happening. Naruto, is this what I think it is? Naruto nodded to Cece as he stopped the van, and Star held out a large roll of bandages. Naruto thanked her before taking them, and Rosa helped him quickly wrap his hands, knowing there would be a fight. Once Naruto finished the last wrap, he spoke up with his tone full of commanding authority. "Get your game faces on, everyone. Something tells me we have to fight our way out or be trapped with them all." They all nodded before they responded in unison. "Right." They all climbed out of the car, and Naruto immediately saw all the men looking at his girls. Naruto walked to the center and glared them all down. Menma glared back at him, and Naruko looked sad as she looked at Naruto. She was beyond angry that he got the fame and glory meant for her. He was a 3-time championship-winning trainer with a team of female Pokemon. If she's heard right, he'd been offered huge amounts to have breeding rights or buy them. Naruto had also savagely beaten one when he grabbed one of them. But she had no real time to think of that as Naruto just walked up to them like he owned the place. Naruto stopped in front of them. Naruto glared at them all, and many were uneasy as they looked at the boy they once mocked. The girls were shocked at how handsome he'd become and how well he'd done for himself and his Pokemon. But one boy who didn't believe Naruto could raise such powerful Pokemon decided to speak up. Kiba, a ground and dog-like Pokemon trainer, spoke up with a cocky tone. "Hey Naruto Baka, where did you steal all these beaches?" Kiba didn't get to finish as Naruto slammed a devastating haymaker into his face. Naruto felt Kiba's jabs sink in before he pulled his fist back and delivered an uppercut. His jaw completely shattered as he fell to the ground with a hard smack. They all looked down at him, shocked, and saw blood slowly coming out from under his face. Naruto kicked onto his side and looked at the others, his glare scaring people and Pokemon alike. Naruto smirked before he spoke. "Some call the mud an ambulance. I'm sure I shattered his jaw." All of them moved back, not wanting to be punched like Kiba. Naruto also couldn't help but notice both his siblings and the Uchiha Sasuke staring at him or his girl, either of which set him off. But unless they did or said something that upset him. Once they were close to the house, they heard the ambulance's siren. Naruto frowned once he opened the and saw all the clan heads in the living room. Naruto smirked when he saw his bruised and bandaged former father. He threw his arm back with the thumb out. "I forgot, who the mother of Kiba?" A wild-looking woman's eyes widened, now understanding why they heard the sirens. She jumped up from the couch and ran past Naruto. Whose smile grew as Lucy slammed the door and locked it, making everyone a little scared. Everyone knew these Pokemon were powerful and didn't want to fight. Seeing the large recliner was open, Naruto walked over and sat down. Leaf quickly jumped onto one arm with Rosa taking the other. Making Naruto laugh as all the others stood at his side or behind him. Naruto, seeing this, made a few of them upset. He smiled a little wider as he wrapped an arm around Rosa's waist and pulled her onto his lap. She blushed but smiled as she leaned back into Naruto. Naruto saw his mother look scandalized as she saw Rosa move around until she got comfortable. Minato's eyes widened as he looked at the scene before him. Naruto rested his hand on Rosa's lower thigh, and Rosa rested her head on his shoulder. She had a smirk on her face as she looked at the annoyed or scandalized-looking humans. "What is the meaning of this, Naruto?" Naruto hummed as he looked over at his godparents who he hadn't noticed since they were at the dining room table. Naruto decided to have a lot of fun screwing with everyone at this moment. Naruto moved his hand to Rosa's waist as he leaned his head and touched his forehead to Rosa's before talking. "Forgive me if I don't know what you mean, old woman. I found it so much more comforting to be holding one of my family when around humans who I hate." Tsunade looked like he'd slapped her, and Jiraiya looked at him like he was crazy. Deciding to make his voice heard, Jiraiya stood up and took a few steps toward Naruto until he heard growls. He looked at them and saw his Lucario, Zeraora, the shiny Meowscarada and Ninetales all growling teeth-beard at him. He also saw that his Infernape's flames were giving off heat waves while she had her wings spread with her feathers puffed out. The Gardevoir BLD red eyes stared death at him as he tried to get close. She wrapped her arm around Naruto's chest as if she was shielding Naruto from him. Each of them gave him a clear warning sign to stay away. Knowing when to back off, Jiraiya took a step back with hands up. Okay. Look Naruto, I get why you're so mad, but a Pokemon can't be family, they're more like a pet. Jiraiya barely dodged a fireball from Cici and saw all the others readying attacks of their own. But the look in Naruto's and Rosa's eyes made him fear the most. Naruto looked at him like he was a dead man walking, while Rosa looked like she was trying to kill him with her glare. Naruto snorted before he spoke as he moved his other hand to Leaf's head and gave her a few pats, helping to calm her down. Her fur was all fluffed up, and it seemed to help before he spoke up. Jiraiya. If you wish not to end up as the blonde and red F who you all call my SPRM, and egg donors, I suggest that you learnt shut the F up before I get up and smashed your jaw like I did Minato or shatter it like I did to the wild mud out front. Jiraiya narrowed his eyes, not liking the threat Naruto was making. Naruto, don't make a threat you can't back up. Naruto smirked as he patted Rosa's thigh. She puffed up her cheeks before she moved, and Naruto stood and then walked straight up to Jiraiya. Naruto grabbed his coat near his throat and lifted Jiraiya off his feet with a strength that shocked everyone. Jiraiya grabbed Naruto's arm before he started to talk. Jiraiya. Never think a threat I make is empty. You may think whatever the hell you want, but never forget this moment. If you ever get so cocky again, I'll make it so you'll beg me to end it as I clear. Jiraiya nodded, understanding, as he looked down at the young man. Naruto smiled and nodded as he set him back onto his feet. Naruto patted his coat down before patting his face a few times. Good boy, now go sit down and shut up. Until I need a male where to talk. Jiraiya, with a sad look, pulled his fist back, not thinking of what had just happened. Naruto's smirk turned evil before he kneed him in the ball as hard as he could, making everyone gasp as Jiraiya's face planted on the floor. Naruto laughed before he looked at all the other. Get out. Me and the girls need to start getting dinner ready. Kushina stood up and raised her hands as she looked at him. And Naruto, we understand why you're still angry, but please. Pokemon aren't family and you shoulder be as close as you are. Please, you can't just push us away. Naruto narrowed his eyes as he looked at her. Either you get out or I drag you out, understand me? Kushina started to cry, then looked away, knowing Naruto wouldn't listen to her. Minato stood up, wrapped an arm around everyone else, and quickly got up, wanting to escape from Naruto. Tsunade got Jiraiya on his feet and then headed for the door. Minato opened it, and they walked out, but Hiruzen walked in after they were all out with his own infinite behind him. Seeing her father. Naruto crossed his arms as he spoke. What's up, Hiruzen? Hiruzen sighed before closing the door. He walked over to the couch and sat down, his infinite behind him. Naruto sat back down in the chair. Leaf and Rosa quickly get back in their place. Hiruzen saw the hybrid Gardevoir sitting in Naruto's lab like she was his wife. Hiruzen decided not to stick his nose where it didn't belong. Whatever Naruto and his girls did behind closed door was their own business. Naruto also saw that Hiruzen didn't care how Rosa sat on him. Naruto. Naruto hummed as he came out of his thoughts and saw Hiruzen looking at him. I'm sorry, I was lost in thought, Hiruzen. What were you saying? Hiruzen frowned before he looked at Naruto. I was saying try not to start more trouble than you all can deal with. Naruto hummed as he rubbed Rosa's thigh before patting it again. Rosa sighed before she got off his lap, and Naruto stood up. Hiruzen watched the Gardevoir as she walked over to the kitchen and walked into it. Naruto frowned as he watched her walk away. With his frown straightening out, Naruto looked at Hiruzen with a look of annoyance. Hiruzen understood the look and stood up, sighing. Just remember, Naruto. I'm always going to yawn your side, Naruto. Naruto watched them as they walked to the door. Once they were out, Naruto sighed, sat back down, and rubbed her eyes, annoyed by everything happening. Naruto. Naruto looked up at Lucy and smiled at her. Don't worry, Lucy. I'm just annoyed about what is happening today. Lucy nodded, and all the girls hugged or kissed him on the cheek. They all went to their rooms while Naruto headed to the kitchen and saw Rosa holding a water bottle. Naruto smiled as he walked over, and Rosa turned and smiled as she looked at him. Are they all gone? Naruto nodded as he wrapped his arms around her waist and rested his head on his shoulder. Yes, sorry you and all the others had to deal with that. Rosa laughed as she turned in his arms and then wrapped her arms around his neck. Don't worry about it, Naruto. We all knew that once we came back here life would be a little rough for a while. Naruto laughed as he nodded his head. Fair enough. Rosa smiled before she quickly moved in and gave Naruto a chaste kiss. Unsurprised by the kiss, Naruto pulled her into another. He grabbed her thighs and then pulled her up as they deepened the kiss. Naruto broke the kiss, moved to her neck, and lightly bit at her skin, making her shiver. Naruto knew where she liked to be touched and how she liked to be touched. Rosa let out little MMS as she let Naruto move along her skin. She grabbed the back of Naruto's head as he sat her down on the counter and moved her dress off her shoulders. Naruto moved over and to the front of her throat and kissed his way back to her lips. Rosa grabbed his cheeks, and once Naruto kissed her lips, Rosa opened her mouth and attacked Naruto's mouth. The two started a heated makeout session as Naruto moved his hands along Rosa's body. But neither of them noticed the Greninja spying on them. The ninja-like frog frowned and jumped away, knowing his MSTR wouldn't be happy. He wanted those females, but it was clear his brother may have already mated them. A trainer and his Pokemon Naruto. 2 hours later Naruto smiled as he walked with Rosa, holding his arm in the sunset's light. Rosa knew that the Greninja was watching and told Naruto after they were done with the makeout. Naruto wasn't happy, but she wanted him to return the news to that fat little brat. She wanted him to know none of them would ever settle for or be willing to fight for him. Do you think they'll try at that mess again? Rosa hummed as she looked up at Naruto. They stopped, and Naruto looked down at her. Do you think that they'll try and use the other clans like that again? To try and use whatever power they have left in this area to try and make it seem like I was wrong for the choice I made. Rosa hummed as she moved before him, still holding his hand. She smiled as she could sense a few people and Pokemon around them. There have been rumors about what they've all been doing for 2 years, and none have said anything to them. But Naruto only has female Pokemon and has never been seen with a human woman. I for one don't care. Naruto, you're our MSTR and more importantly you are our partner. We all love you and are glad to be part of our family. Naruto laughed and nodded before he hugged her before he heard footsteps. Naruto held Rosa tight to his chest as he saw a glint. Son of a... Rosa frowned and pushed Naruto back before turning around. She saw the glint and gritted her teeth. She threw her arm up, and after a second, they heard a set of screams. She pulled her arm back to her chest, and 2 men came out of the forest. One had a camera on his side, and the other had a computer bag. But both had one shirt with Rosa's face on them. Naruto sighed before he cracked his knuckles and started walking over to them. Why do you DMN fanboys never learn? The two looked scared as Naruto reached them. Naruto took the camera away and took out the SIM card before tossing it into the air and catching it a few times. Rosa, my dear, please call the cops. We should have gone and had the restraining order moved to this region before moving here. Rosa nodded as she pulled out her phone from its strap. She quickly called the local police. Once she ended the call, she glared at the men again. I'll tell you two just like I told every other fanboy. I don't want anything to do with you. I can't care how much you say you love me or how much you say I should give you a chance. The two looked crushed, and Naruto laughed as he slipped the SIM card into his pocket. He knew guys like this usually took perverted photos of poke girls, so he'd make a small collection of SIM cards like this. He kept them hidden from the girls, not wanting a beating. What are you thinking about? Naruto laughed as he looked at Rosa as she spun the two in his aura. He waved his hand as he looked away and into the forest. "Oh, don't worry about it, my dear, just trying to figure out what kind of wall we should have. Should I have a stone wall or an electric metal spear fence?" Rosa let that idea fill her mind while Naruto's head thanked God for getting Rosa to forget about the SIM card for now. Soon, they heard the sirens, and the two looked over and saw a police car approaching. 20 minutes later Naruto and Rosa were heading back to the house, and Rosa was excited. It was her night to be with Naruto, and none of the others would mess it up this time. Soon, they were at the house and walked into to see Leaf and Cece playing on their phones. The two looked up at them and then back down to their phones, both with smiles on their faces. Star and Scarlet left the kitchen with a Pokemon protein shake in hand. Scarlet saw them and smiled as she saw Naruto. "Naruto." She walked over and gave Naruto a few rubs to his cheek with her own before she spoke. "Star and I are going for a run in the forest. Will Elle be back before dark?" Naruto laughed before he patted her back as the two moved past them. Naruto smiled before he gave Stars but a quick pinch. She jumped and then turned with a blush on her face. She saw Naruto's smirk, and she smiled too. "Oh, just wait until I get you alone." Naruto laughed as he pulled Rosa into his side, knowing she wanted to get to it. "I'm all yours the day after tomorrow, you know that, so a day and a half shouldn't be too long." Star laughed before she nodded. "Yeah, but don't before we have to go on the talk show tomorrow. A lot of people in the region want to know all about our journey." Naruto nodded, remembering he'd had more than a few calls asking for an interview. "I know, I'm sick of people asking for interviews, and I've had a few breeds calling too." All the girls in the room frowned, and Scarlet growled, having been told about breeders. If any human tried to use her as breeding stock, she'd tear them up. Naruto was the only one she'd ever let near with that in mind. Scarlet blushed and quickly walked out the door. Star quickly followed, asking what was wrong. Rosa laughed into her hand, knowing she'd not let go of Naruto easily when her turn came up. Naruto wrapped an arm around Rosa's waist, and she smiled as she rested her head on his shoulder. They both nodded and then they started heading to the stairs. "Hey, Naruto." Naruto looked at her as they reached the top of the stairs. "Yeah." Rosa moved away a little and looked at Naruto. Naruto saw a soft smile as she looked at her and watched her move her hands to his face. Rosa cupped Naruto's cheeks as she spoke to him. "Do you think that these will finally be the end of our journey?" Naruto blinked, caught off guard by the question. Naruto sighed before he pulled her hands from his face and held her hand. He pulled her into his room and closed the door. Rosa freed her hand, walked over, and sat on Naruto's bed. Naruto put his back on the door and looked at her. "What brought up that question, Rosa?" "Naruto, you know we'd all follow you anywhere you want to go. But now you've bought a car, land, and have a company coming into the building. Are these the last set of gyms, Elite Four and Champion?" Naruto sighed, thinking he should have talked to them all about this. He moved over to the bed and sat down beside her. Rosa quickly leaned into him, and Naruto smiled and wrapped an arm around her. "I'm sorry, Rosa. I guess I should have sat down with everyone. We've been to nearly every region and you girls fought to the top. But, now we've got more money than we'll ever need. Plus, well, eventually maybe we'll need a safe place to grow our family." Before Naruto could finish talking, Rosa shoved him back onto the bed and quickly got on top of him. Naruto looked up and saw her blushing as she looked down at him with a hand planted on his chest. Rosa smiled as she threw her leg over Naruto's waist and then sat on his pages. "Naruto, I love how much thought you can put into things, but right now, after hearing that, I think we should worry about the task at hand." Naruto laughed with a smirk and moved his hands to her thighs. Rosa was glad to see Naruto was ready to go like always. Naruto sat up and wrapped his arms around Rosa's waist, and the two started a slow kiss. Soon, they were getting into it, and Rosa held the back of Naruto's head. Lemon start Rosa cupped Naruto's cheeks and deepened the kiss. Naruto moved his hands back and grabbed Rosa's butt, and kneaded her butt cheeks through her dress. Rosa as she felt Naruto's hands. Naruto broke the kiss, and Rosa felt her thighs getting wet, quickly got off Naruto and got her dress off while Naruto stood and got his shirt off, showing off a scar on his shoulder with a six-pack. When he went for his belt, Rosa grabbed his hands. Naruto, knowing what she was going to do, smiled. Naruto sat back down, and Rosa undid his belt, button, and zipper. Rosa pulled his waistband down, and she smiled as Naruto's 10-inch and 2-inch wide PP popped free. She smiled as around his and started to move them up and down. As she did, she took Naruto's tip into her mouth, and Naruto as Rosa played with the underside of his with her tongue. Naruto looked Rosa in the eye, and she stopped moving her tips and then moved her head down. Naruto put a hand on her head as she took more than half of his PP into her mouth. Naruto again, and after a minute, Rosa pulled his PP from her mouth. Naruto grabbed her arm and pulled her off her knees. Rosa smiled as she slammed down onto the bed and had her butt up in the air. Naruto pulled her panties down, and before she could react, Naruto shoved both his middle and ring finger. Naruto smiled as he started fingering her, making her squirm. Naruto smiled as Rosa as her hips twitched, then he pushed or pulled his fingers. Naruto knew Rosa wasn't the biggest fan of FRPLY, but he knew how to make her wet and how to make her squirm for him. When Naruto was sure she was wet enough, he pulled his fingers out of her before he grabbed her left butt cheek. Naruto grabbed his and lined up with her opening. Naruto pushed the tip into her, and it slipped in, and he grabbed her other butt cheek before he rammed into her. Rosa screamed and had hearts in her eyes as she felt Naruto's tip hitting the opening of her WMB. Rosa smiled as she gritted her teeth as Naruto started to move. Naruto lifted her right leg, as Naruto saw his move hit even deeper. Rosa loved how rough Naruto was with her when they had section. She loved how, when it came to their SEC life, Naruto could be both soft and rough. Rosa's thoughts clouded over as two violent moves forced her deeper into the bed. Rosa buried her face as she tried not to scream again, knowing other humans were around this time. After a few more moves, Naruto grabbed her at Rosa grabbed the blanket with her tongue falling out of the side of her mouth. Naruto smiled as he felt his end coming fast with how tight she was. Rosa pulled him into a kiss as she came from the hard move of Naruto's hips. Naruto slammed into Rosa and into the kiss as she felt Naruto come inside of her. Naruto broke the kiss and pressed his head to her forehead. Soon, Naruto pulled out of her, and his cum dropped out of her. Naruto laid her down on the bed before he laid down beside her. Rosa quickly pressed herself into Naruto's side, wanting to keep feeling his warmth. Lemon and 2 hours later Naruto sighed as he walked out of the bedroom, leaving Rosa sleeping in his bed. Naruto was only in a pair of jeans with his bronze belt. But, what stood out about him was a set of scars going over his left shoulder down over the top of his chest. A scar from a Pokemon he tried to help long again. He'd wished she had let him help, but some Pokemon are loyal even to abusive trainers. Naruto walked into the kitchen and smiled when he saw Lucy standing and humming as she was warming up soup. Naruto walked up behind her, and sure she didn't know he was there, he wrapped his arms around her stomach. Ah! Naruto laughed when she turned to punch the person who had snuck up behind him. When Lucy saw it was Naruto, she relaxed, turned around, and leaned back into his chest. Not funny, Naruto. Naruto laughed as he leaned over and rested his head on her shoulder. He looked over and saw she was cooking some chicken soup. Maybe not. But, you know you love the attention. Lucy laughed a little as she stirred the soup. You may be right, but we both know one day I'll turn and get you one day if you keep doing you sneak up act. Naruto laughed before he moved his hands from her stomach to her forearms. Lucy let him pull her arms up, and he kissed the back of her right hand. Lucy smiled as she loved the attention Naruto gave her and the soft feel of his aura. Knock knock. Naruto and Lucy jumped at the sudden hard knocks from the front door. Lucy growled, and Naruto sighed as he let go of her and let her go. I hate human timing sometimes. Lucy huffed as she nodded her head. You and me both. Lucy turned off the stove as the soup had finished while Naruto walked away. Naruto grabbed a towel from the table and wrapped it around his neck. After waking up, he had a shower but left his towel on the sink. Naruto opened the door as the knocking came again. He dodged a fist and looked at the wild-looking woman with a large dusk-form Lycanroc, her red eyes glowing. Naruto couldn't help but give the Lycanroc a quick once-over. She was about as tall as Scarlet. She was in an old set of black shorts with an old tank top on. Naruto then looked at the woman. She had wild, unkempt hair with red fang tattoos on her face like the boy he'd beaten. She was a sad comparison to the girls he was always with. She had small, narrow hips and a chest, barely a B-cup for a human. You. Naruto hummed as he looked down at her. What do you want, woman? The furious glare of the mother did nothing to Naruto as he looked her in the eye. She was all but growling as she looked at him. What do I want? I want my son's jaw not to be shattered. I want my son to not be in the hospital. Naruto laughed as he stood up, and the woman and her Lycanroc saw the Zeraora and Lucario behind him. Both had looks that could kill them if they did something stupid. Are you going to demand I pay the hospital bills? The mother nodded, now afraid of the Pokemon behind him. She'd seen both fights on TV and was not a fool. She knew her Pokemon was no match for Lucario and would last 2 seconds against Zeraora. Why yes. You did the damage so you need to pay, Naruto hummed and then sighed before he turned and looked at Lucy. Lucy, be a dear and go and get me the checkbook and a pen please. Lucy nodded and quickly walked up the steps. Naruto turned back to look at the woman, who was still worried. Naruto smirked as he pulled the towel off his shoulder and wiped his neck. He saw her eyes widen, seeing the large scar on his shoulder and chest. She saw the jagged edges of the scar and saw it must have come from a Pokemon. But she couldn't tell what Pokemon could leave a mark like that. You're staring at it. The mother jumped and looked away from his scar to look at his face. Naruto smiled and nodded as he reached over and touched the scars. I tried to help a female Jolteon. Trainer was using her and I know you know what I'm talking about. She was beaten and well like I said you know. I don't understand how so many humans can act like a crazed beast. My girls are like my only family. I couldn't imagine beating them or forcing them to do something that they didn't want. The woman and her Lycanroc paled a little, understanding what he was talking about. They watched Naruto sigh before he spoke again. Why do some people act like that and why do their Pokemon stay loyal? They know full well that they wouldn't change. Just one reason why I hate my fellow humans. The mother nodded, seeing one reason why he attacked Kiba so violently when he insulted them. He'd seen what some humans could do, and she'd heard about how he saw his Pokemon as his only family. Soon, Lucy was back, and Naruto quickly filled one out with 50,000 Poke Dollars. Sure, these would be more than enough. Naruto held the check out to her, and she took it a little surprised at how easily he gave her his money. But, when she looked at the amount her jaw dropped as she saw the amount. When she looked back up to talk, the door was already shut. 4 hours later Naruto and Roa smiled as they walked through the forest. Naruto was happy that many of the Pokemon around the area knew him from childhood. Rosa for her part, was just happy to be spending time with Naruto. Many stopped them and welcomed him home or asked if he wanted to come and meet their families. Naruto had promised to come back later with all his girls. Many were happy to hear Naruto had finally taken a few mates and couldn't wait to see the young ones. Soon, they came to the cave where they'd meet, and Naruto smiled as he ran a hand over the stone outside of the cave. Rosa laughed as she looked up at the sky. Naruto took a step forward and looked inside. He stopped, seeing a large bed of leaves, grass, and a small fire pit. "What are you doing here, human?" Naruto heard a female voice and turned around to see a shiny Umbreon. Rosa turned her head and looked ready for a fight. She had large leaves covering the long grass skirt. She was as tall as he was and had a scar on her right cheek. But when Naruto saw an old necklace around her neck, his eyes widened. It was the heart necklace he gave the first EV he met when he entered the forest. The Umbreon's eyes widened as she saw the whisker marks on his face. Amalaya. Naruto. Rosa's eyes widened, seeing that this was another poke girl Naruto had named. Amalaya smiled as she rushed over and pulled Naruto into a hug. Rosa clenched her fist as she looked at her. Amalaya had never seen another human with those marks and hair. Naruto laughed as she wrapped her arms around her lower back, lifted her off her paws, and gave her a spin. After a minute, he sat her back down, and she smiled as she looked up at Naruto. She put her hands on his chest and smiled up at him. Rosa puffed up her cheek, annoyed that Naruto was giving this girl his attention. "Oh, my Arceus. Naruto, I heard you were back from a few other Pokemon. But, I live so far from the village now and never thought I'd see you again." Naruto smiled as he moved his hands from around her and gave her a look. Yeah, a lot of Pokemon are coming out of everywhere but most of my old friends have settled down in the forest areas." Naruto looked back at the cave and Amalaya laughed into her hand as she pushed her chest out some. Rosa almost growled as she glared at this little beach was basically begging Naruto to stare at her. "I'm not with anyone, Naruto. Most EVs and our evolutions don't want much to do with me. My fellow Pokemon sees off-colors like me as unnatural or undesirable." Naruto hummed as he looked at her and then back at the cave. Then, he looked up at the sky, seeing it was getting dark. Naruto was glad he told the girls he may be in the forest for the night. Naruto. He gave a small laugh, remembering girls trying to talk him out of being in the forest this late, but he had Rosa with him. He'd told them there were a few spots he wanted to visit, a few Pokemon families he'd known as a child. Rosa, on the other hand, demanded to go with him as it was still her day. Naruto agreed to take Rosa as it was her day. Then he looked back at Amalaya. "Sorry, I was lost in thought for a minute and I have to ask a favor of you." Amalaya blinked but nodded, glad to help the friend she'd missed. But, made a point to ignore Rosa, something that Naruto had noticed. "Sorry to bother you, but we can't make it back before dark. Can we share your cave for the night?" Rosa smiled as she walked over and quickly grabbed Naruto's arm. She quickly pulled his arm into her chest and rested her head on his shoulder. She smiled when she saw an angry look in Amalaya's eyes. But then, she smiled as she looked at Naruto. "Sure, if you promise to take me back with you too tomorrow." Rosa glared at her, and her eye twitched as Naruto laughed. "Sure, I'm always happy to have a bigger family." Rosa frowned as she knew she'd have to share Naruto's attention even more now, knowing this girl was coming home.